The United States government currently owes $37 trillion. That is more debt than any nation in human history. It is a figure larger than what the entire global economy produced in a single year just 2 decades ago. And here is the heavy truth that no mainstream financial outlet is telling you. They are not planning to pay it back. They are planning to erase it. They will not do this through default because that would destroy the credit of the empire. They will not do it through austerity or higher taxes because that is political suicide. Instead, they have chosen a third option called devaluation. This is a strategic, calculated, and invisible theft of purchasing power from every single person holding dollars. And the specific mechanism they are using is the very thing most people believe is the antidote to government control, which is crypto and gold. You are watching the US government execute the most sophisticated debt elimination strategy ever attempted. They are quietly building a parallel financial system. They are accumulating strategic reserves in Bitcoin and gold behind closed doors. The objective is precise. They are preparing for a great revaluation where they reprice those assets at multiples of their current market value. By doing so, they technically balance a debt load that is mathematically unpayable. But here's the catch that should terrify you. This is a zero-sum game. When they revalue gold and crypto upward, they are simultaneously devaluing the dollar downward. Every dollar you hold loses purchasing power. Every bond you own evaporates in real terms. You are about to be robbed legally, quietly, and completely. In this file, I am going to show you exactly how this mechanism works, and the historical evidence that proves it has already begun. The dossier is open, and the first piece of evidence lies in the power of the reset. Let me start with a fundamental distinction that most people fail to understand. Government debt is not like household debt. When you owe money, you are bound by the laws of physics and mathematics. You must pay it back with real value, which requires you to work more hours, sell your assets, or drastically cut your spending. But governments possess a tool that you do not. They control the currency, and controlling the currency means they have the sovereign privilege to change the rules of the game while it is being played. They can redefine what a dollar is worth. They can revalue the assets on their own balance sheet. They can make debt disappear without ever technically paying it. This process is called a monetary reset, and it has happened repeatedly throughout history. To understand what is coming, we must open the dossier on 1933. The United States was drowning in debt accumulated from World War I and the Great Depression. The debt to GDP ratio was hitting 40% and climbing. While the economy was collapsing under the weight of deflation, President Franklin Roosevelt needed a way out that did not involve default. His solution was a radical revaluation of the nation's base asset, gold. Here is exactly how the operation was executed. In 1933, the official price of gold was $20.67 per ounce, the price that had held steady for 54 years. Under the gold standard, every dollar was literally a claim on physical gold. But the government was insolvent. They could not pay their debts at that price. So, Roosevelt issued Executive Order 6102, making it illegal for private American citizens to own gold. You were forced to turn in your gold to the government, and they paid you the official rate of $20.67 per ounce. Most Americans complied, trading their hard assets for paper dollars. Then, once the gold was secured in government vaults, Roosevelt flipped the switch. In 1934, he announced a new official gold price of $35 per ounce. This was an overnight revaluation of 69% by simply changing the accounting price. The government's gold reserves, which were worth $4 billion at the old price, were suddenly valued at nearly $7 billion. They effectively created nearly $3 billion in value out of thin air just by changing the price tag. The genius of this theft lay in the math of the debt. The government's debt was denominated in dollars. But those dollars were now worth significantly less relative to gold. Before the revaluation, debt was 40% of GDP. After the revaluation and the inflation it triggered, the real debt burden fell to 25% of GDP within 5 years. They erased 15 percentage points of debt just by revaluing gold and devaluing the dollar. The American citizens holding those dollars lost 40% of their purchasing power through the inflation that followed. It was a massive transfer of wealth from dollar holders to debt elimination. The people who had turned in their gold were stuck holding devalued paper, while the government erased its insolvency using the confiscated wealth. This is not ancient history. This is the established playbook. And now that you understand the mechanism of the past, we must look at the mathematical impossibility of the present. The mathematics of the American empire are broken. We are not dealing with opinions or political rhetoric here. We are dealing with cold, hard arithmetic that does not lie. The United States currently carries a debt load of $37 trillion. Pushing the debt to GDP ratio to 132%. This ratio is higher than at any time in American history, with the sole exception of the peak of World War II. But unlike the 1,940 seconds, we are not fighting a war that will end. We are fighting a compound interest curve that never sleeps. The most terrifying metric is not the total debt, but the cost to service it. The annual interest payment on this debt has now breached $1.2 trillion. To put that number into a perspective that should alarm you, the United States government now spends more on interest payments than it does on its entire defense budget. It spends more on interest than on Medicare. Interest has become the single largest line item in the budget, consuming resources like a financial black hole. This situation creates a mathematical deadlock. If interest rates remain elevated at just 5%, those annual payments are projected to hit $1.8 trillion by 2027. That would represent 6% of the entire national GDP consumed just by interest, without paying down a single penny of the principal. This is unsustainable, and the people running the system know it. The Congressional Budget Office knows it. The Treasury knows it. The Federal Reserve knows it. They have run the simulations, and the results are always the same. However, the trap is even deeper than just the government budget. We must look at the banking system itself. The nation's banks are holding trillions of dollars in government bonds that were bought when interest rates were near zero. As rates have risen to 5%, the value of those bonds has collapsed. This has created a massive hole in the balance sheets of the entire banking sector. We saw the first cracks in this foundation with the failures of Silicon Valley Bank and First Republic. Those were not isolated incidents. They were the tremors before the earthquake. If the Federal Reserve keeps rates high to fight inflation, they will bankrupt the banking system. If they lower rates to save the banks, inflation will explode. They are trapped between a banking collapse and a currency collapse. And history shows that when a central bank is forced to choose between saving the system or saving the currency, they will always choose to save the system. They will sacrifice the dollar to keep the banks alive. This confirms that a massive wave of liquidity is coming. They have no choice but to debase the currency to fill the holes in the banking sector and the government budget simultaneously. When a government cannot tax or cut its way to solvency, it has only one remaining option, which is devaluation. They must destroy the value of the currency the debt is denominated in. But they have a problem. If they simply turn on the money printers and pay the debt with freshly printed cash, the world will see it immediately. Inflation would spike uncontrollably. The dollar would crash on foreign exchange markets, and confidence in the U.S. system would collapse. They cannot afford a clumsy hyperinflation event. They need a method that is sophisticated. They need a strategy that looks like innovation rather than desperation, something that appears to be legitimate policy rather than theft. They need a mechanism that allows them to reprice their balance sheet without looking like they are defaulting. This need for a perfect disguise brings us to the two assets they are quietly weaponizing against you. This brings us to the operational phase of the strategy. A two-pronged attack using Bitcoin and gold to manufacture solvency. Let's examine the digital front first. On January 23, 2025, an executive order was signed establishing a strategic Bitcoin reserve. The public narrative claims this is about innovation and preventing the U.S. from falling behind China in digital assets. Do not believe that cover story. The real objective is balance sheet engineering. The legislation introduced proposes acquiring 1 million Bitcoin over 5 years. But observe how they are acquiring it. They are not simply buying on the open market, which would spike the price too early. They are accumulating in the shadows by seizing assets from criminal enterprises like Silk Road and Bitfinex, accepting it for fines, and potentially mining it using government infrastructure. The goal is to hold 1 million coins before the public realizes the game. Once the accumulation is complete, the trap springs. The Treasury does not need to sell the Bitcoin to pay the debt. They simply need to reprice it. They will announce that for national reserve purposes, Bitcoin is valued at $1 million per coin. Instantly, the 1 million Bitcoin they acquired for roughly $120 billion becomes worth $1 trillion on the government ledger. They create $880 billion in equity out of thin air just by changing the accounting price. However, Bitcoin alone is not enough to cover a $37 trillion hole. That is why they need the second prong, the gold reserve. The United States officially holds 8,133 tons of gold, the largest stockpile in the world. But here's the anomaly that proves the intent. On the government's official books, this gold is valued at $42.22 per ounce. That is the statutory price, set in 1973. While the market trades gold at nearly $3,000, the government pretends their massive hoard is worth only $11 billion total. Why would they maintain such an absurdly low valuation for 50 years? Because it gives them massive room to revalue. When the crisis hits, the Treasury will announce a return to a form of gold backing to restore confidence. To make the math work, they will declare a new statutory price of $20,000 per ounce. At this new price, those same gold reserves skyrocket from a book value of $11 billion to a staggering $5.2 trillion. Now, combine the two maneuvers, $1 trillion from the Bitcoin revaluation plus $5.2 trillion from the gold revaluation equals $6.2 trillion in new balance sheet assets. This allows the government to technically offset a massive portion of its debt obligations without ever paying a cent of principal. They make the balance sheet look solvent and the debt to GDP ratio look manageable, all by simply typing new numbers into a computer. But remember, in economics, there is no such thing as a free lunch. When the government artificially creates $6 trillion in value, that value has to be stolen from somewhere. And that somewhere is the purchasing power of the money in your bank account. Now we arrive at the crime scene. You need to understand that this financial engineering is not a victimless magic trick. When the government revalues its assets upward to save itself, it must devalue the currency downward to pay for it. The revaluation of Bitcoin and gold is simply the devaluation of the dollar viewed from the other side of the trade. Think about the mechanics of this seesaw. If the United States declares that gold is now worth $20,000 per ounce instead of $2,800, the dollar has effectively lost 85% of its value relative to gold. If Bitcoin is repriced to $1 million, the dollar has lost 90% of its value relative to the new digital standard. The average American does not think in terms of gold or crypto. They think in terms of groceries, rent, and fuel. But those prices are about to explode because when the currency collapses against hard assets, it collapses against everything else soon after. Here's what this looks like for your life. Imagine you have $100,000 in savings today. You worked decades for that money. You think it is safe. Then, the revaluation happens. Over the next 3 years, real inflation, not the manipulated CPI numbers, hits 20 or 30% annually. Food prices double, gas prices triple, rent increases by 60%. By the time the dust settles, your $100,000 in savings can only buy what $35,000 could buy today. You have not lost any dollar bills. The number in your bank account is the same, but you have lost 65% of your purchasing power. The government stole 2/3 of your life's work without ever walking into your house. This phenomenon is known in economics as the Cantillon effect, and it is crucial that you understand it to see who the real enemy is. When the government and central bank create new money or revalue assets, that new value does not enter the economy evenly. It enters at the top. It goes first to the government, the big banks, and the financial elite who are closest to the money printer. They get to use this new money to buy assets like stocks, real estate, and gold at current prices before the inflation hits. By the time this new money trickles down to you in the form of wages, prices have already risen. The elite have already bid up the cost of living. This is why during every major monetary expansion in history, the wealth gap explodes. The rich do not just get lucky, they are positioned to benefit from the theft. The inflation that destroys your middle-class life is the exact same mechanism that funds their bailouts and asset bubbles. You are not just losing money. Your wealth is being siphoned off to the very people who broke the system in the first place. This brings us to the winners and losers of this reset. The winners are obvious. The biggest winner is the US government because they get to erase $25 trillion in real debt burden without defaulting. The politicians win because they avoid the political suicide of raising taxes. The wealthy win because they hold assets like real estate, stocks, and businesses that inflate in nominal terms, preserving their wealth through the transition. And, of course, the early holders of Bitcoin and gold win massively as their foresight is rewarded by the state's desperation. But the losers, that list includes almost everyone else. The middle class is destroyed as wages fail to keep up with the exploding cost of living. Retirees on fixed incomes watch their pensions evaporate in real terms. And the biggest losers are the bondholders. If you own US Treasuries, you are holding a contract that guarantees you will be paid back in currency that is being actively murdered. You will be paid every cent you are owed, but those cents will be worthless. Bondholders face a 70% loss in real value. This is the brutal reality of the strategy. The government survives, the elite thrive, and the savers are gutted to pay the bill. Knowing who the victims are is not enough. You need to know how to stop being one of them. We are now moving from analysis to action. If you still doubt the severity of what is coming, simply look at what the smart money is doing. The world's central banks are not buying dollars. They are buying gold at record rates. In 2022 and 2023 alone, central banks purchased over 2,000 tons of gold, to the highest level since 1950. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are aggressively stockpiling thousands of tons of hard assets and building infrastructure for a post-dollar world. These governments have intelligence agencies and economic advisors who see the mathematical reality. They are preparing for the collapse. Furthermore, we must understand the geopolitical game theory at play here. This is not just about domestic debt, it is about global dominance. The United States knows that trust in the fiat dollar is eroding internationally. If China or Russia were to back their currencies with gold before the US does, the dollar would lose its status as the world reserve currency overnight. That would be the end of the American empire. Therefore, the United States is forced to act first. They must be the ones to revalue gold and legitimize Bitcoin to capture the value of these assets before their rivals do. It is a defensive move on a global chessboard. They are cornering the market on the future of money so that when the fiat system fails, they control the lifeboats. If the US government is positioning itself for a hard asset future to survive, you must ask yourself why you are still holding on to a dying paper currency. If they are preparing, why aren't you? To survive this transition, you must execute a specific 4-step protocol immediately. Phase 1 is to exit the death zone. The most dangerous place to be is in dollar-denominated debt instruments. You must sell all long-term government bonds and corporate bonds immediately. These are certificates of confiscation that will lose 70% of their real value during the revaluation. Next, evaluate your cash position. While you need liquidity for emergencies, holding excess cash is financial suicide. Reduce your cash holdings to exactly 3 months of operating expenses and move the rest. Phase 2 is to accumulate freedom assets. You need assets that cannot be printed by a central bank. First is physical gold. This is your insurance policy. Do not buy ETFs or mining stocks. Buy physical coins and bars you can hold. Target 10 to 20% of your net worth here. It is the proven store of value for 5,000 years. Second is Bitcoin. This is your growth engine. If you can handle the volatility, target 5 to 15% of your net worth. The U1IS government is preparing to revalue this to $1 million. You need to front-run their trade before the price becomes unreachable. Phase 3 is strategic debt management. Most people misunderstand debt during inflation. They think all debt is good because you pay it back with cheaper dollars. This is a trap. Wages rarely keep up with inflation, meaning your ability to service debt drops. You must ruthlessly pay off all high interest, variable rate debt like credit cards and personal loans. However, there is one exception: the fixed rate mortgage. If you have a 30-year fixed mortgage at 3 or 4%, keep it. Do not pay it off early. As the dollar collapses, the real value of that debt will inflate away, effectively transferring wealth from the bank to you. Phase 4 is skills and networks. When a currency fails, the social fabric strains. Your ultimate hedge is not just financial, it is practical. Build skills that generate value regardless of the currency, such as trades, medical knowledge, or repair skills. Connect with a local community that has resources and resilience. In a crisis, your network is your net worth. Finally, memorize this timeline because the window is closing. 2025 is the accumulation phase. The government is buying quietly, and you must do the same. 2026 is the crisis phase. The bond market will shake, and the justification for extreme measures will be manufactured. 2027 is the revaluation. The trap snaps shut. The dollar collapses, and asset prices reset. You have approximately 24 months to position yourself before the door slams shut forever. You may look at this strategy and feel it is unfair. You may think it is theft. You are right. It is legal theft. But the government does not care about your moral principles. They care about their own survival. Faced with the choice between a sovereign default that destroys their power and a devaluation that destroys your savings, they will choose to sacrifice you every single time without hesitation. The timeline for 2027 is set. The mechanism has been activated through signed executive orders and the introduction of the Bitcoin Act. This is no longer a speculative forecast. This is visible public policy. You can continue to hold dollars. Trust the official narrative and hope for the best while your life savings evaporate. Or you can look at what they are doing, ignore what they are saying, and position yourself accordingly. History proves that in every monetary reset, wealth is never destroyed. It is merely transferred. The power to choose which side of the transfer you are on is still in your hands, but the clock is ticking.